Okay, I'm going to be going to some of your questions and some of your comments, especially with the last two videos that I put up where Al-Fadi and I unpacked whether or not both in the Quran and in the or on the inscriptions of the Dome of the Rock, whether the name Muhammad is a man or is it the praised one, the servant of Allah. Now, you have put up lots of responses. Thank you for those responses. I have been reading them, and I'm just going to pull out a few of them that I want to unpack for you and really support, because some of the things you're coming up with help not only embolden but also enlarge what I've been saying and what Al-Fadi has been saying. Let me start with one that was written by Gerd. I don't know if that's the right spelling, or I'm sorry, the right pronunciation. He says this: for the record, as great as Murad's work is, he didn't come up with the Muhammad as the blessed one hypothesis out of thin air. And that's true. I don't think we've ever said that Murad was the first one to come up with that idea. We use Murad because Murad has such a great background in Arabic and in Syriac. Gradio says the Inara scholars, notably Karl Ohlig and Christian Luxemburg, are the main scholars who made that conclusion in their book, The Hidden Origins of Islam. This book right here. And this is the book we need to go to, and this is the book that really does unpack it. There's an awful lot in this book, and if any of you want to go and do some study on your own, you have work done by Volker Popp on the numismatic testimony, looking at some of the inscriptions. Christian Luxemburg, that's not his real name, and he's the one that really goes into the Arabic inscriptions on the Dome of the Rock on page 125 of this book. And so we're using his material as well. So Murad's not the first, that is true. Looking at and continuing on with looking at the Arabic and where the Arabic came from, the fact that it came from Aramaic. It's all in this book. But the man who's really done the best work is this guy right here. This is Christoph Luxemburg. That's a pseudonym. He has to go under a pseudonym. It's called the Syro-Aramaic Reading of the Quran. The Syro-Aramaic. So he puts it in Syria-Aramaic. So it's the Aramaic that comes from both Syria and Jordan, that area. What we have been talking about. Some of them have been saying the Nabatean Aramaic. That's another way to say this material. But it's coming out of the Syriac side of it, the Syriac writings. And so he has an entire book looking and re-looking at the Quran. Well worth reading. It is difficult reading, and for those of you who are not linguists or don't like linguistics, you're not going to love this. But what he does, he goes right through and he exegetes many of the difficult passages in the Quran and shows that most of the difficult passages in the Quran, once you look at the Syro-Aramaic pre-formulations, which are Christian in nature, you will see they dissolve many of the problems in the Quran, because it looks like much of the Quran has been borrowed from this Syro-Aramaic reading. And that's why so much of the Quran today just does not make sense. About 20% of it, according to the Muslim scholars today, they cannot understand. And if they were to read this book and see, well, why is it that so much of the Quran has been borrowed from those sources, those Christian sources, they may be able to understand an awful lot more. Christoph Luxemburg has really unpacked that, and that's what Gradius is saying here. The critical scholars' consensus, that's people like Luxemburg and also Ohlig and Volker Popp, and others, is that Muhammad is potentially a title reference to Jesus. Ohlig and Luxemburg, in particular, have stated in their book that Abdul Malik, that's the one that we've been talking about, the caliph from 685 to 705, who built the Dome of the Rock, along with Al-Hajjaj, who would have been his governor up in Iraq at that time, were formulating a belief system that was emerging out of Monophysite views. The Monophysites are the Christians at that time, who believed in only one nature of God, and that his divine nature, that he did not have a human nature. The Nestorians and many of those who come down through Christianity, those of us who are part of Christians, believe that God had two natures, both human and divine simultaneously, that he took on as God, as divine. He took on human nature for those 33 years he was on earth. The Monophysites believed, no. He only has one nature. And that was what was most popular in that part of the world, in what is today Syria and what is today Jordan and Lebanon and Israel. That area of what used to be called Eropatria, named after Petra, the city in there that we've been talking so much about, the Nabatean city of Petra. So here you have, he's formulating that, so the reference to Jesus as Muhammad or as the Rasulullah on the dome of the rock may be indicative of that. And he says, I think this is a stronger weight to Jay's idea, a stronger weight than Jay's idea that Muhammad is a title for Abdul Malik. And that's true, and I would agree with him that really this idea that Jesus is being referred to is more than likely what we see there. Now, what I want to do is also go on to another. Here is another really well-written response by a man named Thalame. Maybe it could be a woman, I don't know. But Thalame, thank you so much. I would love to get in touch with you. I would love to do some programs with you. You really seem to know your material, and you've certainly done a lot of research. And it's quite long, so I'm just going to read it. Some of you may have read it already, but I'm going to read it and then say things here and there about what he's getting into. And he starts off by saying this: I like that you go into linguistics some more. He likes linguistics. You can see why once we get through this. You really need to go to Christoph Luxemburg's analysis, first published in 2000 and refined over the decades. So this is the book he's talking about, and I would highly recommend that you get it, put it in your library. Try to get through it. It is heavy reading, but this is the book he's referring to. Luxemburg certainly convinced me that Muhammad is nothing more than a title, not a name in early documents. So therefore he's not a man, he's actually a title, the blessed one, the praised one, including on the Dome of the Rock. It makes a lot more sense to read it that way than to read it as a name. Now, I would go one step further and say, if this is the case with the Dome of the Rock, why would we therefore also suggest that this is not the case also for the Quran, the 4 references in the Quran? And also, don't stop there, would this not also be the case for the coins that Abdul Malik mints in 692, 693, and 696 with the praised one on included in the Shahada? Also, if you're going to do that, then why stop there? Why don't you go to the Caliphal Protocols that he put out in 691, where overnight this idea of the praised one is introduced? We've always thought it meant Muhammad. It looks like what Luxemburg is saying and what Ohlig is saying and where Thalame is saying here, that this is the praised one. This is referring to Jesus Christ himself. And he goes on. Muhammad being a title used for Jesus makes a lot more sense, he says. Otherwise, the bit about Jesus sticks out like a sore thumb. But there are more arguments. It starts with the Bismillah. Then Bismillah al-Rahman al-Rahim. That's what he's referring to. Then Muhammadun is a gerund. That's a form of speech, which is why there is no word is in that sentence, which would have been there if Muhammad was a name in this context. So it's praise be the servant of Allah. That's what it is. That's what's written there, and not Muhammad is the servant of Allah. So take the is out, and which is not there, and it becomes praise be the servant of Allah. Then it continues to talk about Jesus, which makes sense because it's referring to Jesus, is what he's saying. Historically, that also makes sense. That also makes sense for servant of God, Abdullahi, which was used in the Syrian Christian tradition as a title for Jesus. And praising him, Benedictus as title, not name, was of course prevalent everywhere. So therefore it was already used by the Christians before. So the reference Muhammadun Abdullahi has always existed as a description of Jesus. Muhammad, the praised one, the servant of God. In the Quran itself, Jesus calls himself servant of God and prophet directly after his birth. In chapter 19, verse 30, he talks about himself as a child, as the servant and prophet of God. So it's there in the Quran. Why, therefore, are we not surprised that it would also be when his name or the name is introduced in those 4 different places? Luxemburg, he says, has a lot more convincing arguments, though they hinge on his Syriac Aramaic reading of the Quran. So I'm not going to get into this, and because of that, you'd have to take this whole book and unpack it if you want to do that. We don't have the time to do that. Though you guys should, as it makes perfect sense to read the Quran that way. And I think we're going to have to. And I think what we're going to have to do is unpack this book for all of you so that you can understand what Christoph Luxemburg is saying and what Ohlig is saying. Karl-Heinz, Ohlig. They are the scholars. We're not the scholars. They are the ones that have come up with the material. All we're doing is taking what they say and we package it so you can understand it. And what he's saying is you guys need to do that. Not only, he continues, does it illuminate the dark passages of the Quran. These are, what he means by dark passages, these are the ones that cannot be understood. Roughly 20% of all the verses in the Quran cannot be understood. However, once good old Luxemburg gets to it, they are quite understandable if you look and see how they were originally written, what they meant in the Syriac, in this case, Syriac Aramaic reading, readings of it. It explains also the scribal errors and clearly shows how Muhammad was used as a title for Jesus in the Quran. It was a Christian text, albeit one that rejected the Trinity and the God of Jesus. So therefore, it was a monophysite text. It was a text that reflected the Christianity of that place and that time in the 7th century in what would be the Eastern Mediterranean. That part of the world at that time was monophysite Christianity. And so therefore, it reflects that writing, and it's that writing that makes its way into the Quran, which then makes sense why it is on the Dome of the Rock, why it's on the coins, why it's on the Caliphal Protocol. And then he gives an example. Look at chapter 72 of the Quran, verses 18 to 20. If we read the Quran as a Syriac text, a Christian Syriac text, then it says the following. Mind you, he's translating Luxemburg's German translation into the English. It would be better if you just go right to the English. So some of the details might be off, as he says. But this is the gist of what it says there in that. Verse 18, and only God is worthy of worship, so next to God you shall not call upon any other. Verse 19, and when the servant of God was resurrected and continued to praise him, they, the people, had almost worshipped him as God. Verse 20, whereupon he spoke, I call upon my Lord and don't add another. This fits perfectly, is what Ptolemy is saying. This fits perfectly with the inscription on the Dome of the Rock, as it does, and I agree with him on that. Now, continuing on. If you're going to look and ask what's on the Dome of the Rock, if you're going to look and ask what's on the coins, if you're going to look and ask what is on the protocols and also in the Quran, which comes later, remember the Quran comes after the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is the first reference we have for anything that's Arabic, that early, or that would be, looks like Quranic, Quranic references. Then you're going to have to ask what was the milieu? What was happening at that time? We've already said over and over again, don't go to the traditions to find out what was happening at the time. Go and see what was happening politically. Go and see what was happening theologically. Go and see what was happening linguistically in that part of the world. And I would suggest I would add to that geographically and politically, because if in every case you see nothing is happening down in Mecca and Medina. It's all happening up north. It's all happening where the Syro-Aramaic was taking place and where all the inscriptions were being written. And these inscriptions are using the same type of Aramaic Arabic, which later became the Arabic that we then use, or then we then find in the earliest manuscripts from the 8th, 9th, and 10th century. So if that is the case, why don't we go back to those earlier texts? Why don't we go back to the Christian texts? Why don't we go back to what they were saying? Since they're lifted out of those texts and put into the Quran by the Umayyads and then later by the Abbasids, wouldn't it make sense then to go back and see what exactly the Christians were saying? And if that is the case, then when you find the reference to the word Muhammad, which we always assumed was a name, it could and looks like it is very well that this is the praised one, the servant of God. Good on you. Thanks so much, Thalame, and thanks so much, Gradius, for your introductions and also for your well-written responses, great responses. Those are the kind of responses we need because they help us enlarge upon what we're talking about. God bless you. This is Jathan, over and out.